The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2002 that executing someone with an intellectual disability constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Intellectual disability is one of two categorical bars the court has placed on the death penalty. Those who were under 18 at the age of a capital crime are also ineligible for the death penalty, the court has held. While stopping short of abolishing the death penalty, the U.S. Supreme Court has taken measures to limit its applicability, so that it is used primarily in cases where the defendant had the most culpability. People with intellectual disability are not in that group. Occasionally, states, too, determined that the death penalty could be too harsh as applied to some defendants, and many passed laws exempting people with limited intellectual ability from the death penalty. The mental health community has provided clear criteria for a finding of intellectual disability. Significant limitation in intellectual ability and adaptive behavior, manifesting itself prior to the age of 18. Although the question of a national ban on the use of capital punishment for those with intellectual disability was rejected by the Supreme Court in 1989 because so few states had taken action on their own, the issue re-emerged in 2002 with a new consensus. 30 states had either ended the use of the death penalty entirely, or at least for those with intellectual disabilities. In Atkins v. Virginia, the court held that the nation's standards of decency had evolved to the point where no such executions should occur. It also concluded that there was little, if any, deterrent or retributive effect from executing such defendants. A man whose lawyers said he was intellectually disabled, Arthur Lee Burton. The victim, Nancy Adleman, had been brutally bitten and strangled with her own shoelace in a heavily wooded area off a jogging trail along a bayou. For every woman who has ever exercised alone, or who has walked out to her car alone at night, this case is their worst nightmare. Nancy Adleman was killed on July 29, 1997, while out jogging along Brays Bayou in Houston. Harris County Sheriff's deputies found Adleman's badly bitten body in a 4-foot hole in a heavily wooded area along the bayou the next day. Burton was arrested by authorities 10 days after the murder, and although he initially denied killing Adleman, he eventually confessed in a written statement after officers found inconsistencies in his alibi. In Burton's written statement, he admitted to attacking Adleman, dragging her into the woods, choking her unconscious, removing her shorts and underwear and raping her. When Adleman regained consciousness and began screaming, Burton choked her unconscious again and dragged her into the hole officials found her in. He said she begged him to let her go, claiming she told him, "I forgive you." He continued, "She told me to just leave. She asked me why was I doing it and that I didn't have to do it, and saying that I was a handsome man." He claimed he tried to leave, but to stop her screams the then 27-year-old choked her again before they both fell in a hole. When Burton was about to leave, he saw another person walking nearby, so he returned to the hole and strangled Adleman to death with her own shoelace. Burton was convicted in 1998, but his death sentence was overturned by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals in 2000. He received another death sentence at a new punishment trial in 2002. Burton's lawyers had argued that reports by 2 experts and the records showed Burton exhibited low scores on tests of learning, reasoning, comprehending complex ideas, problem-solving, and suggestibility, all of which are examples of significant limitations in intellectual functioning. They had argued the evidence was a strong indication of an intellectual disability that made him categorically exempt from the death penalty. Prosecutors, however, argued that Burton had not previously raised claims of an intellectual disability and that he had waited until 8 days before his scheduled execution to do so. An expert for the Harris County District Attorney's Office, which prosecuted Burton, said in an August 1st report that he had not seen any evidence Burton suffered from a significant deficit in intellectual or mental capabilities. I have not seen any mental health or other notations that Mr. Burton suffers from a significant deficit in intellectual or mental capabilities, said Thomas Gilmet, a psychology professor at Providence College in Rhode Island. In Burton's latest appeal, which the U.S. Supreme Court rejected on Wednesday, the 7th of August 2024, in the afternoon, his lawyers argued that he is intellectually disabled and thus ineligible for the death penalty. In a petition filed just days before his scheduled execution, Burton presented recently developed evidence of his intellectual disability, including an evaluation by a clinical psychologist who found that Burton meets the criteria for mild intellectual disability, various neuropsychological tests, school records, and supporting commentary from 7 people who knew him in his adolescence. The state rejected Burton's claim, citing a clinical neuropsychologist's evaluation that the qualitative and quantitative evidence are not consistent with the presence of intellectual disability. The state's report argued that the results of Burton's IQ tests fell several points above the range that indicates a disability, that he appeared to have been a very prolific reader while on death row, and that he has not required additional support to function in the prison system. Hours before the scheduled execution time, the U.S. Supreme Court declined a defense request to intervene after lower courts had previously rejected Burton's request for a stay. On August 7, 2024, Arthur Lee Burton was executed. After 27 years of his crime, Arthur Lee Burton, 54, received a lethal injection at the state penitentiary in Huntsville and was pronounced dead at 6:47 p.m. local time. He was condemned for the July 1997 killing and attempted rape of Nancy Adleman, a 48-year-old mother of 3. Burton appeared nervous as he lay strapped to the death chamber gurney, and a spiritual advisor prayed briefly over him, the inmate's right leg twitching under a white sheet that covered him from his chest to his feet. In his last words, Arthur Lee Burton said, "I want to say thank you to all the people who support me and pray for me," Burton said when asked by the warden if he had a final statement, his voice repeatedly cracking with a sharp breath after saying several words. "Bird is going home," he said. "To all the people I have hurt and caused pain, I wish we didn't have to be here at this moment, but I want you to know that I am sorry for putting y'all through this and my family. I'm not better than anyone. I hope that I find peace and y'all can too." He nodded to his brother, Michael, watching through a window nearby, took 4 gasps as the lethal dose of the sedative pentobarbital began taking effect, then appeared to yawn before all movement stopped. He was pronounced dead 24 minutes later. Burton was the 3rd inmate put to death this year in Texas, the nation's busiest capital punishment state, and the 11th in the U.S. As of 2011, death row inmates in Texas cannot request a final meal, meaning Burton had to choose from the same menu as all other inmates at the state penitentiary in Huntsville before he was given the lethal injection. That change to final meals was made following the execution of Lawrence Russell Brewer, a white supremacist who was executed in 2011 for murdering James Byrd Jr. in 1998. A lawmaker had complained about him asking for an enormous amount of food, including 2 chicken fried steaks, 3 fajitas, and a pint of ice cream, before claiming he was not hungry once his last meal was delivered to him. Thank you for watching Death Row.